In 1977, which here in the UK, in the summer, we were celebrating the Silver Jubilee of our Queen Elizabeth II, I can remember coming home from school at the age of 9 in a very excited state. When I got home, I knew that I had a nag on my hands because my dad had promised to take me to the cinema, me and my brother, that night to see Star Wars. Now, Star Wars had been much hyped. It was the greatest, most outlandish science fiction film that had ever been made. I can't quite remember why I knew about the film so much before I saw it, but I did because I'd gone and bought the book version of it. And this book version told the story in a novel form and also had photographs from the film. So I went along to see this film in great excitement. But I knew with my dad coming home for work, it would be very easy for him to turn around and say, no, I'm a bit tired. I've just got home from work and I did promise you, but in reality, now we'll go another day. And I knew that that was going to happen. And so me and my brother decided to protest. And the way we protested was by going outside and sitting on the top of his car, waiting for him to come out to the car to drive us to the cinema. Eventually he realised that he didn't want to sit outside on his car because probably it looked very dodgy to the neighbours, and in the 70s that sort of thing really mattered. So he came out eventually and we got in the car and we drove down to see Star Wars. Now, in 1977, there was still a huge cinema in my little town. Now, in the 50s and 60s, there had been possibly 3 cinemas in this town. But with the collapse of the film industry that was going on in the early 70s, these had diminished. And the one cinema that was left just showed a sad array of, softcore porn films that were very popular in the early 70s. And sort of pot boiler, made... and various reruns of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was pretty slim pickings in the early 70s. A lot of film critics will celebrate things like The Godfather and all the stuff that was happening in America. But in reality, here in the UK, the film industry was dying.
Some crew. Oh, no! Some holiday.
That's better.
It's a surprise package tour, and all that the brochure promises. Terrific views.
You don't get a bad view from down here.
Historic monuments. And the smallest bikinis.
Have you gone raving mad?
But the cinema still had a resplendency, although a little bit seedy. But I can remember walking in and buying the tickets to the box office and then ascending the long stairs upwards because in the old days, this had 2 levels. It had all the seats down the bottom and then there'd been a set of gallery seats. Now, at some point, they'd taken all the seats out down the bottom and we were only left with the gallery seats. And I didn't realise at the time when I sat there, not being able to see down below, that those seats weren't there. I assumed that the whole cinema was packed. But in this case, it was just the top part that was packed. And it was packed when we arrived at the cinema. There was a queue going around the block. And I do believe that back then, rather than you have like a theatre where you have a start time and an end time, there would just be a programme that rolled around and round and around and around and around and around like this. And so you could, if you wanted to, go halfway through the film and enter at that point and then wait and then go through all the stuff and then watch the film. And sometimes my dad, who didn't like queuing, wanted to do this. Now, what I remember was standing outside for a long time. It could have been the duration of the film. And eventually, the queue wasn't moving, and then the queue suddenly moved and we were in. And I can remember walking in with my father and my brother and sitting down to watch this film. And with the anticipation that had built up to this point, this film still managed to deliver. And my generation were completely changed by this film, to such an extent that this film, Star Wars, may well, at that point, have rescued the film industry. And after that, there seemed to be a series of blockbusters coming out. Most notably, the sequel, long-awaited sequel in 1979, The Empire Strikes Back. And a few years later, when I was older and I'd grown up, and perhaps the sort of cartoonish fairy tale aspects of the first Star Wars were matched by this much more adult version of Star Wars, which was so much more full of unhappy endings and strange revelations. And by the time Return of the Jedi came out, and I went to see that in a different cinema, I actually went up to Solihull up the road to see that with my cousins. And when I watched that, I was actually, by this point, an early teenager. And I can remember thinking that the Ewoks were quite childish. But I felt that in terms of action, it had sewn up the hole. And that journey from 1977 to 1982 or 83 or 81, I can't quite remember when the Return of the Jedi came out. But the point is that was a period of time. And then within that, we had films like E.T., we had blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Grease came out, Saturday Night Fever. Suddenly people were going back to the cinema. And it's interesting to ponder on what it was about Star Wars that made it so good. Now, I am going to posit an idea on this video which may be of interest to you. I think that if we look at massively successful films, they tend to have an underlying theme, which is quite interesting when you explore it. Now, when we look at someone like Alfred Hitchcock, we could look at Alfred Hitchcock by examining it from a Freudian perspective, and then it will make sense. It's almost like he, as a filmmaker, is working in a structure that has come from Freud.
Come on, I've got you. Up.
I can't make it.
Yes, you can. Come on.
Harder.
Come along, Mrs. Thornhill.
All right, this is silly.
I know, but I'm sentimental.
Now, if we look at sort of the French New Wave or the films that came out of that, we could perhaps look at that in a sort of postmodernist structure. So there's a philosophy that goes before filmmaking of what and how you want to achieve. So when film first emerges at the turn of the last century, we're really dealing with people trying to film plays. The camera is positioned like an audience member, and then the action unfolds in front of the audience, the viewer. And that's how a lot of early silent films developed, except they had an issue because a theatre play has language. What you're watching now, watching a YouTuber talking to you like this, I'm basically just talking into a camera, and because it's the talking that counts. Now, I have set up the lighting. I have a great big light here. There, it's shining on me to get the lighting right, and I've dropped the exposure down to create this mysterious, moody, dark background. So I have considered the aesthetics of this film I'm making here, but the language is far more important. Well, for the first 30 years of filmmaking, that wasn't there. And so filmmakers had to learn how to visually tell a story. And because film was so complex to make and it was being made by a team, it required organisation. And so early filmmakers had to develop techniques to bust out of this idea of looking, through the proscenium arch at a play and start to get involved in the action. What's very interesting when you watch the Great Train Robbery is that it's a theme that would run through filmmaking all the way through. And this was made in 1903. And we can see in that film, we can see innovations that are actually repeated in Star Wars. Probably the most important bit of that film, the great train robbery, is when the cowboys at the end, the villains, actually turn to look at the person there, and they pull the gun out and they fire the gun at the audience. Once this is like a Brechtian alienation effect, but it also brings the audience in and it threatens the audience at the same time. And then suddenly we start to see the manipulation that exists in film of the fact that the audience is having to do the work. That is what makes the audience interested, and you have to consider the audience being there in a way that's different to a play. Now, the techniques that they developed to achieve this was to have a director that would be like sort of the circus ringleader, and he would oversee all the different things working together. Obviously, you would have a writer, you would have a cameraman, and the cameraman has to make sure the camera's in the right place. The actor has to be in the right place. You have a cinematographer that's making sure it looks pretty and beautiful and looking at the scene. The set designers, all these people are involved in this one creative whole, right? And this idea develops that the director is the one who is in charge. Now, that's negotiated through the history of film and doesn't really emerge until the French New Wave. But what they do is they spot with the great directors, the classical studio period, that although they're working within a studio system that's very strict, right, and is like a factory, the director, because they're in control of all the different pieces, can manipulate those in a way where they are able to put their aesthetic framework across. Now, they are not the actors imbuing the story with characterization and making us feel that. They're not the cinematographer creating the aesthetic elements of the film. Then they're not the writer that's actually written the story and has got the meaning. The director's doing nothing but everything. And what I want to posit here is what the director's actually doing is the director is making the film to a philosophical standpoint. And in Hitchcock's case, it's Freudian. Okay? And so I'm sure that Hitchcock was very, very aware of Freud and decided to put that aspect in this idea of the subconscious. And into that now, Freud's great student was, of course, Carl Jung. And he came up with this lot of stuff that when I was a kid in the 70s was seen as being quite balmy. But over the last few years, Carl Jung's importance as, I say, a philosopher or psychologist has become more and more there in terms of our culture. And I would say, because the arts are always ahead of culture in that way, that this actually starts with Star Wars. The idea of being a Jungian filmmaker, right, emerges with Star Wars. Now, of course, these ideas go all the way through all of storytelling, because if Jung's correct, and the idea that it's not just our unconscious we have, which is apparent in Hitchcock, where he'll take somebody and we see the film through their eyes, and then he'll put them into a situation where they're not comfortable. Everything is turned upside down. And that uncomfortable chaos represents the subconscious, and it plays out. And the protagonist, which is usually a man, has to then negotiate their way, usually related to some sexual proclivity. So in, say, the Rear Window, it's the fact that the guy's a voyeur, and even though he's got Grace Kelly there with him, he only gets motivated when he's looking through his binoculars at the scene that's going on. And that's what creates the framework. That's the Hitchcockian aspect of this film. And the whole way it's set up, the idea of the Rear Window, is to see that that's what's going on. Well, my argument is that George Lucas, who created Star Wars or directed it, is a genius because of a certain change he makes. Because what we had in America at that time was a failing movie industry. The 1960s saw rock music emerge, it saw television emerge, and people started to get their kicks elsewhere. And where we'd been a lot more communal in the epoch that went before, those things were being broken down. And so the idea that the family would go out to see a film, that didn't exist. Teenagers went to see films in the 1960s. They go to a drive-in, but they want to see some schlocky horror film. And so schlocky horror films became important to that generation. Now, at that time, in France, the French New Wave, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Francois Truffaut, were looking at the studio system and going, it's very interesting because the studio system works in genres. Genres is the idea that you have like a Western, or you would have like a sword and sorcery, or you'd have a swashbuckler. You know, there's genres about romantic comedy. These are the genres that exist. And the Hollywood studio system really is a purveyor of that. There's very few Hollywood films from the classic period that you can't just straight slot into a genre, and they operate within that genre. But within the genre, you had genre directors, but these directors had their own themes. And so the French New Wave filmmakers looked at Hitchcock and thought, Hitchcock's got his own stuff going on. He's the real author of the film, not the writer, because these themes are in all of it. And the reason is because Hitchcock's in control of every aspect of it. And with that revelation, which is called auteur theory, the French New Wave the French New Wave filmmakers decided to start to explore filmmaking from their point of view. And they wondered, if Hitchcock can put his Freudian ideas across, could I put my political ideas across? Or could I put my ideas about filmmaking across?
Un tournage de film, ça ressemble exactement au trajet d'une diligence au Far West. D'abord, on espère faire un beau voyage, et puis très vite, on en vient à se demander si on arrivera à destination.
Bonjour monsieur, excusez-moi de vous déranger. Vous ne me reconnaissez pas, je suis Lajoie, le nouveau régisseur.
Si, bien sûr, oui.
C'est au sujet des voitures reçues pour l'accident de Pamela.
Oui.
Vous savez, il faudrait choisir entre ces deux-là.
Entre ces deux-là?
Oui.
La blanche irait bien si on pouvait la peindre en bleu, hein, c'est possible?
C'est possible, 200 000 francs.
200 000 francs pour peindre ça en bleu? Non, on la garde comme elle est. Mais dites-moi, elle est bien blanche quand même, hein? Pourquoi vous ne me proposez pas celle-là qui est bleue, là?
Non, celle de l'assistant, Jean-François.
Jean-François? Ben oui, il sera peut-être d'accord, Jean-François. Hein?
Écoutez, je vais lui demander.
Vous voyez avec lui, oui. Qu'est-ce qu'un metteur en scène? Un metteur en scène, c'est quelqu'un à qui l'on pose sans arrêt des questions à propos de tout. Bonjour Damien. Quelquefois, il a les réponses, mais pas toujours.
Vous avez été satisfait de la place là?
C'était très bien, vous aviez absolument raison, puis ça s'est bien passé, on a eu une chance formidable avec le temps, c'était très bien.
Oui, j'ai vu. Je peux vous montrer le bungalow?
Eh ben allons-y tout de suite.
Ah non, la construction n'est pas commencée, ce n'est que le plan là.
Ah, le plan.
Voilà. Alors, tout l'intérieur sera meublé complètement, c'est-à-dire le lit, 2 chevets, des sièges, une table en amorce avec un...
Attendez, je vous arrête, hein. Je peux vous garantir que la caméra n'ira jamais dans le bungalow.
Ah bon?
La caméra reste à l'extérieur, on filme le bungalow par la fenêtre, donc qu'est-ce qu'on voit? Le lit, c'est tout, hein. C'est la seule chose qui compte, c'est le lit.
Bon, ben d'accord.
Ok, voilà.
French New Wave considerably changes the nature of film. And it's a little bit like the move from realism to expressionism and cubism that had happened in painting 50 years before. Suddenly, reality there's a realization that reality cannot be documented by trying to make things be real. That the artifice that Hollywood studio system uses to make you feel like you're watching something real is artifice. To be real, you need to film in real locations. You have to have plot lines that break up. The world doesn't make sense. All this is going on. You know, the Beat Poets, William Burroughs, that's going on there. And we've had this in Italian realism in the 1940s. So there's a move towards the 40s and 50s to make films in a different way. A different type of reality wants to be explored. So we'll once have the schlocky horror films that kids are going to see, and then this new art type of filmmaking that's happening in Europe. And those two things come together in America. And the sort of postmodernist idea that there is actually some sort of alternative artistic worth buried in these schlocky films starts to all merge together in one. And a whole breed of filmmakers emerge that are making schlocky genre films that the kids would like, but at the same time has very deep ideas that come from French New Wave film. Now, George Lucas, who was in with a group of people that would include Martin Scorsese, would include Steven Spielberg, would include Francis Ford Coppola, is undoubtedly the most avant-garde of that group. And his early films are very, very harsh, modernist, alternative storylines, black and white French New Wave influenced films. But as we go into the 70s, George Lucas makes a film called American Graffiti, which is a nostalgia film. He actually creates a new genre. This is what I mean. This is a new genre of film. He looks back to the 1950s through these sort of rose-tinted spectacles, and he plays that out in a film which, for people who are now adults, reminds them of their youth in a certain way. There's enough cultural distance now to be able to do that. This happens in films all the time, but that was quite groundbreaking at the time. And of course, it's a huge hit. And off the back of that hit, he decides then to go for the genre film. And his idea is to go for the idea of the Western shot through Akira Kurosawa. So he looks at a Japanese film by Akira Kurosawa called The Fortress. And the idea he likes is telling this sort of cowboy type film, but from the point of view of the lowest of the low, right? And so he comes up with the idea of having these two robots. They're right at the bottom, but they're key to the whole story. This grand narrative is going to play out, but it's going to be seen from right from below. But that's not the only influence from Kurosawa. Kurosawa, of course, by this time, with the influence of this sort of postmodernist view of filmmaking, we'd had people looking to Kurosawa films, being able to see how the plot lines had come through from Shakespeare through Kurosawa down to like things like The Magnificent Seven. That journey, and it was going to continue. It continues all the way through filmmaking. And what happens with this next generation of filmmakers is that it starts off with films like Easy Rider. It starts off with Bonnie and Clyde, okay? Action films, The Wild Bunch. It's a generation of filmmakers that are pushing the envelope in terms of what you can see in film. They're also pushing the nature of genre films themselves. I think the spaghetti westerns took the whole Western genre and turned it upside down. So it's very important to understand the importance of films like Star Wars, to see the idea of genre and to see the idea of the auteur, the director, and how those two things relate and how that had become a theme at that point in filmmaking. So what we see is this second wave. And before you know it, we have Steven Spielberg making The Duel, right? Which is basically a chase film. He then repeats the same story exactly again for Jaws, and almost like creates a new genre there, out of taking the chase film and then metaphorically transferring it across. From Jaws, he then moves straight to genre filmmaking with Close Encounters of the Third Kind and then E.T., and really knowingly approaches the idea of genre with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And we see that line moving through. Well, George Lucas does exactly the same thing. And in 1977, he decides to create this film, Star Wars, based upon this very simple idea. There's a grand narrative being played out, right, as seen from these two points of view, R2-D2 and C-3PO. But the genius of George Lucas is to decide to go back to ancient storytelling. And in this respect, he, without knowing, or maybe he did know, he starts to explore the idea of the collective unconscious and the Jungian archetypes. So Carl Jung talked about these archetypes. It's actually very hard to explain what they are, because what an archetype is, it's like a collective idea. And it sort of replaces this philosophical idea that Plato had, that there's a perfect realm and then there's an imperfect realm. And that's how we relate to categories. Jungian's categories were much more based upon something that existed at a lower level. you know, that human beings existed on the earth for millennia. And within that, they told stories and they developed ideas. They'd attributed, you know, spirits to the forest. They'd attributed spirits to the sea. They thought about their forefathers and what happened when they died. And through that, they had created, through storytelling, through their own view of the world, a way of understanding the world. And so you have this idea, which is very related to this sort of perfect forms that Plato has, but it's much more rooted in the visceral and the lower and emotional energy.
They are instinctual images that are not intellectually invented. They are always there, and they produce certain processes in the unconscious. One could best compare with myth. That's the origin of mythology. Mythology is a pronouncing of series of images that formulate the life of archetypes. And so the statements of every religion and of many poets are statements about the inner mythological process.
So we have the idea of the mother. Not my mom, not your mom, but the idea of the mother. And this might be embodied with the Virgin Mary, but it's also embodied in Mother Earth, in nature, right? Nature that exists on this level here. And then above nature is the heavens. The heavens are sort of male, okay? We have the idea of time and Father Time. And Father Time is wise. We have the idea of the wise man, the old wise man. These are all archetypes and they all play out. And when we start to talk about the wise man, we know exactly what we're talking about. The wise man, the wizard. In every story that makes us emotionally work, there's the wise man. Now, throughout cinema history, these archetypes exist, but they exist in all sorts of different forms. I watched True Grit, the remake by the Coen brothers, the other night, and it struck me that the main character with the patch, you know, that guy that John Wayne played in the original, he's the wise man, he's the wizard, but he's lost his way. And he has to be rejuvenated by the naive and yet focused bravery of somebody very young, with the girl that wants to avenge the death of her father. And that is an archetype. The hero, the young hero that is brave and has the answers to the puzzle, but they don't know what it is, that teams up with the wise man. And the wise man knows how to do it all, but needs the young person. And it embodies in that this idea of regeneration and forward movement. And those are embodied in those two things, right? The archetype of the hero. Now, what's interesting in True Grit, in true postmodernist style, the hero is female. But we're very aware that this female is not acting like a female. They're acting like a male, okay? Because the female would be either the scarlet woman, the whore, or it would be the virgin, the innocent girl, the girl that needs to be saved from the dragon. And the dragon, of course, represents wisdom, but it also represents the danger of knowledge. It's the snake that exists in the Garden of Eden. Now, some of you may know all these archetypes. I think the most interesting one for most of us who go to art is the idea of the shadow. Now, the shadow is the inverse of you. We all have a shadow, okay? So there's me and there's my shadow, as personified in the song Me and My Shadow, all right? And the shadow is you, but it's the negative version of you. It's basically Satan, but Satan is you. And it's the awareness or the subduing of the awareness that you have a monster inside yourself, right? Now, I think this idea of the hero and the hero fighting that monster, they may fight dragons on the way, but the real monster is not the dragons. The real monster is the shadow, okay? And this can be seen across so much different films, and you see this played out all the time, very specifically. But I think what happened in the early 70s is filmmaking had been marred by a sort of postmodernist view, and everybody was just thinking that art was about chopping things up, getting it wrong, putting this idea across, putting that idea across. And films had crashed at that point, and in that void had come a whole bunch of quite exploited, pornographic, horror, schlocky films. And they were the only films that people were really watching at that time. And they weren't even really watching those because it wasn't great filmmaking, despite what the postmodernists said. George Lucas's incredible innovation with Star Wars, I think, was to bring this Freudian aspect in the idea of the fairy tale shot through the genre of the Western, the oldest genre, the one that was personified in the Great Train Robbery at the beginning of this video, but also look into the future and stick it into space. And with every aspect, he changes it. Okay? Early science fiction films had been fantastical. Science fiction films were there with the Lumiere brothers right from the beginning. By the time we get to the 1950s, most science fiction films are playing out this idea that there's communists in America and they're great big threats.
Can't you see? They're after you! They're after all of us! Our wives, our children, everyone! They're here already! You're next!
And so we see the science fiction genre changing as it goes along. The advent of 2001 by Stanley Kubrick had not only upped the level of special effects to make it feel like you really were in space, but it also it portrayed an almost mundane aspect of going into space, right? And Star Wars takes up with that, but rather than it being seen as being a human endeavor, he takes things from Coltrane, from Tolkien, not John Coltrane, I'm getting my channels mixed up, from Tolkien, and he puts it in another realm, a different time, in a different space. He creates his own Middle Earth. He's pulling directly from all these iconic storytelling things. He's pulling from them all. He's assembling them into one. He's like a greedy magpie. He's like a greedy magpie storing stories, right? And he quite consciously did this. He starts to pull all these different things in from different places. And with this, he very specifically starts to build up that every single Jungian archetype is in this film, and he plays with it. You know, you have Princess Leia, who is both the hero and the virgin. And later on, the horrible, you know, what's her name, the big sluggy fella, he turns her into the whore, but she's not really the whore, she fights it out. So we see that play out with Princess Leia, right? There's very strange things going on in the sex in Star Wars, but that's another video. I think that would be too much detail, but that's details there, and it's compelling. And what's bizarre is even when I was 9 years old, because we've all grown up with these ideas in us, we responded directly to that, not to the special effects, not to the fact that we understood. That was all wonderful, but what was compelling was the story, and the story's quite simple. And the story is about a hero. And the hero is displaced. He's the outsider. He's the insider and the outsider. He's also the rebel, right? He's going to rebel against the things. He's going to join the rebellion. He's a rebel. He's a rule breaker, but he's young and he's naive, okay? He's going to team up with a whole bunch of different characters, but the most important one is the wizard, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Obi-Wan Kenobi has been there and he's done this and he's done that. He's wise and he knows about it, but he's made a mistake, and that mistake has cursed him, and he can't solve that mistake. And he doesn't realize that the only way to solve it is to access the chaos of the hero, because the hero doesn't know what they're doing, and in not knowing what they're doing, they will be able to innovate something that will solve this problem and solve Obi-Wan Kenobi's problem, okay? Within this, they then get their team together, and usually the team will have two other people working alongside you, which represent chaos and order, and they are represented by the two robots. C-3PO is all about order. R2-D2 is all about chaos, and we're going to see chaos and order play out on a very small level between those two. And when they come together, they are able to take part in the story that, although they are right at the bottom, like the Hobbits, you know, because we have all of that with the Hobbits, you know, with Lord of the Rings, we've got actually The hero is obviously Frodo. Then we've got Samwise Gamgee, he's Order, and then we have the two other ones, two lots of chaos moving around, doing all this type of thing. You know, in Harry Potter, we have Harry Potter's the hero, and then we've got Hermione is Order, and Ronald Weasley is chaos. This is how specific it is. You want to have a hit film? You have a hero, then you have two people working with. 3's a magic number. 3, the law of 3, the things that make things come to be. The hero in the middle doesn't know, confused, naive, right, but has this it's based upon courage. They have their courage and principles, which will allow them to throw themselves into a situation not knowing and take advice from chaos and order all the way through it, chaos and order. And through that, they will negotiate it, right?
You should be told the difference between empiricism and stubbornness, Doctor. I checked with the library computer, just as you did. I got the same information.
Aren't you getting a little out of line, Mr. Spock? My personal business.
It's my personal business when it might interfere with the smooth operation of this ship.
You think that happened?
It could happen.
I don't like anyone meddling in my private affairs, not even my second in command.
Jim, Spock's simply trying to...
I know what he's trying to do, and I don't like it.
It's his job, and you know it.
We have the hero. The hero exists. It's Harrison Ford. He's the cool one. It's not Luke Skywalker. It's Harrison Ford. He's dashing, but he's trapped in his dashingness, right? And there's a fault there. There's a fault in that hero because he's arrogant, right? And he doesn't listen. That's the standard hero. This is a different type of hero, right? As he starts to go through this to rescue the Virgin, which is Princess Leia, which is given a very 70s feminist twist, but she's still the Virgin dressed in white and all that type of stuff. And they're going to rescue her from the lair. And the lair is like the cave or the underworld that you've got to go in. And there's usually a dragon that you're going to have to fight a dragon on the way there. And they fight many dragons on the way there, don't they? But the point is when they get there, right, there seems to be a power structure there, and that seems to be the enemy. But what you find out is not that. The real evil, the heart of Star Wars is evil, is not the people who are running the show. It's the Dark Lord himself, Satan, Darth Vader. And we see Darth Vader at the start. We see Darth Vader and Princess Leia. We see purity, virginity, and we see Darth Vader all in one, right? And he attacks her. She is stuck in her lair like this, and he's coming at her. She's got her protection, but he's too powerful. He's coming to her. What's he going to do with...
And now, Your Highness, we will discuss the location of your hidden rebel base.
Proddy thing, doesn't he? It's like a big proddy thing to prod Princess Leia with. We know what the infidel wants to do. We know what Satan wants to do. It's pure chaos. It's absolute terror. It's a fate worse than death. That's what Princess Leia has to withhold. And Luke Skywalker's not going to have it because he feels connected to her, right? He's connected to her, and you assume it's because he loves her. He loves Princess Leia. But he has never met her. He falls in love with her when he sees her, but he falls in love with the principle of going to save her. That's what he falls in love with. As the film starts to develop, Darth Vader is seen as this shadowy character, right? And what plays out is that in the end, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the great wise man, he atones for his sins, whatever they may be, by actually sacrificing himself to Darth Vader. And he is at peace with that. Although Luke Skywalker has now had that taken away, ready for the next film. As we move to the next film, the darkness now envelops. There's no Obi-Wan Kenobi, but we have this much stronger idea of the Force, you know, this sort of quasi-religious structure that is imposed on Star Wars. And the Force is very interesting because the Force is both chaos and order working together. And it's fear that drives the dark side of the Force. It's actually fear.
Everything. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
And we come to learn that Darth Vader, for all that front, is created from fear. All right? But of course, the biggest and most profound thing about Star Wars is the revelation in The Empire Strikes Back, that when you confront the shadow, which Luke Skywalker is moving towards all the time, because he never really confronts Darth Vader, when he finally confronts Darth Vader, he's far too powerful for him. You know, he slices his right hand off. He is made impotent by this darkness. He's impotent. All right? He has met the alpha male Dark Lord, but the Dark Lord is him. Right? And the wizard in the second film, of course, is replaced by Yoda. And there's a respite where there's even more knowledge to be found, but Yoda was also removed. And at that point, when he finally meets his shadow, he's on his own. The most profound thing that Yoda teaches him is he gets him to try and face his shadow, and he enters that cave. The metaphorical cave that you go into to discover, confront the shadow and discover the truth about yourself. It was the same cave that they tried to resurrect in the remakes. And I am going to be talking about this at length. I'm going to be talking about Star Wars on this channel at length, in great detail, believe me, because I think there's so much to be learned by exploring why Star Wars was such a big success. And I'm introducing the idea on this video for you here. So when he finally confronts the shadow, he is left wanting. But the great revelation is to realize that the shadow is him. All right? And the whole thing turns upside down, because now, rather than wanting to rescue the princess, he moves to a greater level. Sex, you know, marriage, all that type of stuff, that is passed on to our sort of shallower hero, the more swashbuckly one, and Harrison Ford, and then we see that play across. That's great, because we always want the sort of that romantic thing going on, but it's not for Luke Skywalker, because Luke Skywalker is something else. Because Luke Skywalker is gonna have to sacrifice himself in facing the shadow, and he's going to have to, as the film plays out, have the faith that the shadow actually is him, and within him is good, so that it must be within the shadow as well. Now, this storyline is about as Jungian and archetypical as it could possibly be, right? It hits so hard that it's like virtually every scene, once you understand it from a Jungian point of view, you can analyse and see great profound truth is within every scene. And the genius of George Lucas is he knew this. He understood this. He understood that they couldn't find lasers at each other. They had to have a sword fight, because the sword fight it represents an individual battle. In Harry Potter, you have the wand fight, you know, and this is important. It's a battle between you and them, between me and my shadow. That's what plays out. Just shooting at each other doesn't work. You have to have the equivalent in the spaghetti westerns, in the westerns, of the shootout. It's a duel. Now, duels are really important because it's a fight between good and bad, and the fight between good and bad isn't just about good or bad. In the Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns, we don't know who's good or bad. You know, well, there isn't really a good. There's not really a bad, but it still plays out. This is what films do. This is what makes films successful. You can make your arty films, and you can make your weird points, and you can go in and say what you think the world should be about and all that type of thing. But it's harder to actually create a storyline that triggers these buttons and things in us that are so deep, and then is able to play these millennia-old ideas out in front of us, but in the context of the situation we're in then. Star Wars wasn't a success because of the special effects or because of the action. All that played a part to it. The reason why we sat there and we felt we'd been delivered something as kids is because of those archetypes, because he got it so right. And the arc across those three films, right, that really represents the dialectic. It really represents thesis, Star Wars, antithesis, Empire Strikes Back, synthesis. And when you look at Return of the Jedi, and I've realised this, get to this point, is that for me at a certain age, looking at the world and at the age of 11, and going to watch Empire Strikes Back, and being shown these things that at 11 I was aware of, that the world wasn't quite like I thought, that the adults weren't in control, that there was untold evil and it could threaten me and I'm frightened by it, but I'm going to have to face up to it, but I may lose. All that darkness was really important. When I got to 14, you see that there's aspects within Return of the Jedi, which is the two films put together. There's all the swashbuckliness, there's all the stuff for the kids, there's the Ewoks, you know. And I think the Ewoks, which are perhaps one of the few stumbling bits in the film, although there's still a lot of meaning that plays out. Because obviously the Ewoks, this is like a Rousseauian idea that there is some sort of wisdom in ancient people and that we were noble savages. And the idea that this great big modern empire, this great big system will be toppled in an almost sort of Marxist way by these sort of sticks and stones and all that type of stuff of the Ewoks. And they are of nature, but when they arrive, they worship order in C-3PO, don't they? The order of C-3PO they recognise. And through that contact of him, they are then able to organise themselves. And so we sit there open-mouthed as they're able to take down all these really high-tech things with just bits of rope and bows and arrows, because they become organised. It's a story that plays out, and it goes right back to Kurosawa again. It is basically, you know, the Seven Samurai played out. He plays out these little micro stories throughout the film. At the end of Return of the Jedi, the sort of utopia that we arrive at is an Ewok utopia. You know, they're not on some shiny spaceship. You know, they've gone back to nature. Now, of course, this theme has played out since then over the last 40, 50 years. But the truth is that in 1977, this was really just emerging. This idea of treating the nature better and respecting it. And so even if I just examine that bit, it's still very profound. And this is all the way through these films. Now, as I get to the end of this video, I think that we now have 9 films. So we now have a trilogy of trilogies. And I think that looking at the dialectic in terms of storyline, you know, beginning, middle, end, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or scenario, problem, solution, everything that we, you know, like the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, you know, all these dialectics that exist throughout art applied to a Jungian archetype really starts, this is the way to understand successful filmmaking. So I'm doing this video to posit an idea which I'm going to start to explore on here. What went wrong with Star Wars? What's culturally gone wrong to get us to this point now? A lot of us, when the middle 3 were made by George Lucas, they didn't quite deliver what the first had, but we were grown up at that point. What was George Lucas up to on those 3? I want to examine that. And then what the hell went wrong at the end? Because I think fundamentally is the filmmakers that made the last 3 have, it's not even this postmodern filmmaking, it's postmodern filmmaking. And it has been filled with so many ideas that are of the time. The philosophy of these directors is not the same as the philosophy of a Hitchcock or a John Ford or a George Lucas. It's the basic philosophy that underpins it, which forced them to put away the archetypes, which are there. The archetypes are all there in the last 3 films. And they're played out very strongly, but they're played out wrongly. And so it's nothing to do with the special effects or the fact of this or the fact that that. Nobody, I think, has really nailed what is wrong with those last 3 films. I'm going to do it here, I hope. I'm going to really try. And I have a number of massive Star Wars fans, so we're going to be having some debates about these films. Star Wars is going to be very important on this channel, as is Lord of the Rings, as is Harry Potter. Those 3 sort of franchises, not so much your carry-on films. You know, or your James Bonds. Your Carry On and your James Bonds are related. I'm going to rank the Carry On films. I'm going to rank the James Bond films. I will then show the relationship between the Carry On films and the James Bond films. But these 3 franchises, Harry Potter, then going back to Lord of the Rings, and then going back to Star Wars. And there's some other ones we can categorize it here. This is archetype filmmaking. It's fairy tale filmmaking. And the ones who do it well push those buttons. They did not do that well, right? And I think with the last 3, what I will be exploring is this idea of seeing the archetypes are there, but then looking at the story arcs. And not only do they not play out correctly, but actually they're confused. And they are playing out 2 or 3 things at the same time. And this is the basic postmodernist lack of meaning, that this is this and this is that. And also, obviously, the ongoing, takeover of authoritarian identity politics into the storylines that Disney are now pushing out, which is very interesting when we look at the arc of Disney and the way Disney acquired Star Wars at a certain point and then tried to shoot it through this new idea that Disney see the world through, which of course nobody wants now. That's quite apparent that nobody wants it. And that arc that has played out, going from Snow White, one of the most archetypal films of all time, and Disney's brilliance at realizing the success you could have of being able to play one of these fairy tales out using special effects. This is so important. Fantastical films are difficult to make. The cartoon, they were able to do Snow White, and it pushes all these archetypal buttons. And here we are, 90 years later, at the end of Disney, and you see them launching Snow White and getting it's so unbelievably wrong. And the fact is, returning to right at the front of this, Star Wars was a success before it came out. It was a success before it came out because we were hungry after this desert of cruddy films that had shut down my cinema, had taken half the seats out. We were all queued up outside because we knew that we were going to get some archetypes. We knew we were going to get a storyline that we felt here rather than up here. We knew it before it came through because we only had to look at the photographs from the films or the artwork from the films. As soon as we saw it, we knew what we want, and people were hungry for it. Right? And when you fast forward, it's not that they're hungry for. By the time you get to the last few, it's just Disney trying to extract worth out of this franchise. But the philosophy that they impose on it destroys it. And it's chaotic. The films themselves are chaotic. Right? They're unbalanced. The storylines do not work. They do not make sense. The characters do not make sense. The point of the story and the payoffs don't sound like something that brings you to the fulfillment of a contextual cultural balance of archetypes related to that culture at that time. It's the absolute opposite. But in that way, it actually embodies the time we're in right now. The fact that by the end of the 3 Star Wars, all they were trying to do was just make a storyline that would please everybody and would tie up regardless of what it actually meant. But the problem is when you get to the end of the Star Wars and you watch those last final scenes, well, I can remember sat in the cinema and I'd switched off by that point. And all the spectacle and the fact that they had more spaceships and more explosions and more planets blowing up, more evil people and more good people, and they're all coming back, and we're hearing the voices of everybody. Lando Calrissian is coming in like this, and everybody's there, and we should have been feeling this great big nostalgic rosy glow. I was switched off at that point. It was just noise. It was just like black, dark spectacle. And I just did not care about any of it. And none of these characters that I was supposed to care about, I had any feelings for whatsoever, because they weren't real. I couldn't see myself in them, and I couldn't see anybody else in them. I couldn't see any meaning in it. There was nothing in my life that felt that they'd given a profound revelation to by this story. It was just problem solving. It was problem solving. It was a mixture of ideology and trying to keep everybody happy. There was no creative thought behind those Star Wars films, the last three. None at all. And that arc is interesting. That arc is interesting because it follows a cultural second half of the postmodernist period. It's the second half. It's the peak of it, and it's the atrophying of it, right down to where we are now. You wouldn't think clever people with millions of dollars behind them and every aspect of all the most talented people in the world could mess up the Star Wars franchise. You wouldn't think that would be possible, would you? But they did. And is this just a precursor to what they're about to mess up, which is the real culture that this sits within? Or can we rescue this? Can we rescue this by actually going back and saying this was what was wrong? Not the fact that this story point didn't add up, or why did they do this and then this doesn't go on here, or Rey suddenly became a Jedi just like that overnight. Luke Skywalker had to work at it. Why is she a Jedi anyway? And who the hell is she? All these plot things that don't make sense. That is not what makes it bad. There's something so deep and it's so profound to work out why those three Star Wars films are so bad. There's something so profound. And then they go on and they bring these TV series out and they're all more and more rubbish. More and more rubbish. The whole thing's crashing and they don't want it to do that. And from there, they go, what should we do next? Snow White. Let's just go for the thing that actually represents us. Not only as a company, but as a culture. As a film history. Right? Let's go for that and absolutely destroy it before it even comes out. That's the important bit. Ponder on it, because we will be coming back to it. I can't solve it now. There's not enough time here to do it. All I can do is just open the door, which is what I've done. We have opened the door here. I hope that you enjoyed my talk. I hope you enjoy this different aspect of looking at filmmaking and storytelling that I'm going to try and bring to here, which I hope will be interesting for you. If it is obviously like this, subscribe. This channel is going to be the esoteric channel in my three channels. I've got my three channels here. I've got the main music channel, I've got my politics channel, and here the bets are off. This is where I'm basically dealing with storytelling here. That's what this channel's about. Okay? The music channel is about visceral, the emotional reaction to music, which is the visceral reaction. And the politics one is talking about order and undermining the ideas of order, but also exploring what's the best sense of order. And this one here is going to be storytelling. Right? So storytelling is like, it gives order to the visceral, right? But within the storytelling, the story can be very outlandish. And so I do want this channel to become a place where filmmakers can actually put their videos up. And I hope we get a following here that they can go, I'm going to premiere my video that I've made here and create a creative outlet for storytellers. That's my fundamental reason to be here. So if all that sounds very interesting to you, you know, like and subscribe. But my point is that I am not going to be doing a video a day here. I'm going to try and do one a week to start off with. And then once I'm up and going, I'm going to do them if and when. This stuff here will be based upon my unfettered muse. All right. It's a channel from the art side of me, because I used to be a painter. This is the channel here where I'm about to do that. I will always be upfront. I will always explain it to you. You're going to get some even weirder stuff than you've ever seen on this channel, but you're also going to get an interesting discussion, I hope, which you will be involved in, you know. So if you like the idea of this, then stick a like on. If you want to see some more, please subscribe. I do have a Patreon. The links aren't here. They're on the main channel. Maybe I'll need to put all that up anyway. We won't bog you all down with that. Like and subscribe's good enough for me on this time at this moment in time. So thank you for watching. See you on the next one.